Good afternoon. Well, I'll start off just asking if we have any deaf or hard of hearing attendees today. If we have interpreters, if necessary. And it looks like not necessary at this point. Okay. Welcome to the B. Thomas Golisano College of Computing and Information Sciences and to the Dean's Lecture Series. I am Andrew Sears. I'm the Dean of the College, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. The purpose of this series, which has been around for about 10 years, is to bring people from industry and government and companies that have done interesting things and have insights to share to campus to talk with our faculty and our students and the community at large and share those insights. And it's been a very interesting series for the year and a half or so that I've been here, and I'm really looking forward to today's talk. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Louise Van Ahn. Louise is an associate professor of computer science at Carnegie Mellon University and is known for his work on CAPTCHAs. How many of you know what they are? Okay, for those of you who don't, it's the fuzzy little words that you have to type in. Okay, so how should I introduce them? The fuzzy little words you have to type in to verify that you're actually a human being when you're doing things on the internet. Anti-spamming technology, I think, is the other way it's described. But he's also behind the ReCaptcha idea, and that's the newer variant of it that you might have seen, which uses a lot of the CAPTCHA results to digitize books and other print materials. He is a MacArthur Fellow, was named by Fast Company as one of the 100 most innovative people in business, and has been hailed as one of the brilliant 10 scientists by Popular Science magazine. His research focuses generally, I think, on what you would describe as human computation, and it's the idea of leveraging what people are good at and what computers are good at and putting that together to solve big problems that neither one would necessarily be able to solve independently. And today he's going to be talking about the new project, Duolingo, which focuses on, I guess, two things. One is teaching people a second language, but this at the same time translating web materials and other materials into another language. So without any further delay, please join me in giving our guest speaker a warm RIT welcome.
So you said everything I wanted to say, so questions? Okay, just kidding. I will start with this. Okay, so how many of you have had to fill out one of these distorted characters? Good, excellent. How many of you found them annoying? Good, good, good. Well, I invented that. That thing is called a CAPTCHA, and the reason is there is to make sure that you, the entity filling out the form, are actually a human and not a computer program that was written to submit the form millions of times. The reason it works is because humans, at least non-visually impaired humans, can read these, but computer programs can't do it as well yet. So for example, in the case of Ticketmaster, the reason you have to type these is to prevent scalpers from writing a program that can buy millions of tickets two at a time. Okay? So now, CAPTCHAs are used all over the internet. And since they're used so often, a lot of times the precise sequence of random characters that are shown to the user is not so fortunate. So for example, this is a CAPTCHA that was shown in the Yahoo registration page. The random characters that happened to be shown to the user were W-A-I-T, which of course spelled the word wait. But the funny thing was the help message that the Yahoo help desk got about 20 minutes after this was presented. They got this message. Okay, whoops. This of course is not as bad as this poor person. Okay, now in general, a CAPTCHA is just a program that can tell whether its user is a human or a computer. Okay, let me say that another way. A CAPTCHA is a program that can generate and grade tests that most humans can pass, but current computer programs cannot. So notice the paradox here. A CAPTCHA is a program that can generate and grade tests that it itself cannot pass. Okay, so in that way, CAPTCHAs are a lot like some professors. Okay. I'm a professor, I can say that. Okay, so that's the idea. Most of the CAPTCHAs that you've seen are these distorted characters, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just a program that can distinguish humans from computers. Okay, now, let me just show you some of the different variants of CAPTCHAs that people have invented. Some of the different, I'm not going to show, there's literally hundreds of them. I'm just going to show you a few, the particular ones that I find most interesting. And it's just because they're They're culturally interesting. Okay, so here's one. This is one that started coming up in all kinds of Russian sites. Okay, by the way, for each CAPTCHA that I present, remember, it has to have two properties. First of all, it should be easy for like 99% of the humans to do, and it should be hard for computers to do. Okay, those are the two things you need to be looking for. Okay, so this one's one that started coming up in all kinds of Russian sites. Okay, we're going to call this the Russian CAPTCHA. That's how it is. Okay. Of course, this is actually a pretty crappy CAPTCHA because computers can actually do this. But it's funny to think that in Russia, they think that just any human can do this. It's funny. Okay, so this is one that started coming up. Here's another one that started coming up in all kinds of different Indian sites. We're going to call this the Indian CAPTCHA. You have to analyze a circuit. Again, not a very good CAPTCHA because computers can also do this. But again, funny to think that in India they think anybody can do this. Okay, so now to put things in perspective, in Russia, the CAPTCHA is to solve a limit. In India, it's to analyze a circuit. Let me show you a CAPTCHA that started coming up in all kinds of US-based blogs. We're going to call this one the American CAPTCHA. I wish I was kidding about that. But, again, this is not a very good CAPTCHA. Turns out computers can do math. So, OK, now I could tell you funny stories about CAPTCHAs for a while, but instead let me move on to another project that I worked on a few years after that. It's kind of the evolution of CAPTCHAs. It's a project that we called ReCaptcha. So this started actually as a project inside Carnegie Mellon University. So then we turned it into a startup company. And then about 3 years ago, Google actually acquired this company. So everything that I'm going to say for the next about 10 minutes is now property of Google. OK, so this project started with the following realization. It turns out that about 200 million of these CAPTCHAs are typed every day by people around the world. Now, when I first heard this number, I was quite proud of myself. I thought, look at the impact that my work has had. But then I started feeling bad, because the thing is, each time you type one of these, not only is it super annoying, it wastes about 10 seconds of your time. And if you multiply that by 200 million, you get that humanity as a whole is wasting like 500,000 hours every day typing these annoying CAPTCHAs. So then I started feeling bad. And I started thinking, is there any way in which we can use this effort for something that is good for humanity? So here's the thing. While you're typing a CAPTCHA during those 10 seconds, your brain is doing something amazing. Your brain is doing something that computers cannot yet do. So the question is, can we get you to do something useful? Another way of putting it is there some humongous problem that we cannot yet get computers to solve, but that somehow we can split into tiny 10-second chunks, such that each time somebody solves a CAPTCHA, they solve a little bit of this problem? And the answer to that was yes, and this is what we did with ReCaptcha. So nowadays, what you may not know is that while you're typing a CAPTCHA, not only are you authenticating yourself as a human, but you're also helping us to digitize books. Okay, so let me explain how that works. So there's a lot of projects out there trying to digitize books. Google, for example, has one. They're trying to digitize all of the world's books. Amazon also is trying to digitize books to put them in the Kindle. And basically, the way it works is you start with a book, like a physical thing. You've seen those things, right? Like a book. Okay, so you start with that, and then you scan it. Now, scanning a book is like taking a digital photograph of every page of the book. It gives you an image for every page of the book. The next step in the process is that the computer needs to be able to decipher all of the words in these pictures. That's so you can search through the book. That's done using a technology called OCR, for optical character recognition, which tries to get a picture with words and tries to figure out what those words are. The problem is that for older books, because the ink has faded and the pages have turned yellow, the computer, if you've ever seen like the photocopy of an old book, it looks pretty distorted. The computer just cannot figure out a lot of the words. For example, for things that were written more than 50 years ago, the computer cannot figure out about 30% of the words, what they are. So what we're doing now is we're taking all the words that the computer cannot figure out, and we're getting people to read them for us while they type a CAPTCHA on the internet. Okay, so next time you type a CAPTCHA, these words that you're typing are actually words that are coming directly from books that are being digitized that the computer could not recognize. And we're using what you're entering to help digitize the books. Now, the reason there are now 2 words instead of just 1 is because for one of the words is a word for which the system already knows the answer. That's the one that we're going to use to figure out whether you're a human or not. Then the other word is a brand new word out of a book. The system does not know what it is. And we're going to give you both. We're not going to tell you which one's which. And we're going to say, please type both. And if you type the correct word for the one for which the system already knew the answer, then it assumes you're a human. And it also gets some confidence that you typed the other word correctly. And if we repeat this process to like 10 different people and they all agree on what the new word is, then that word becomes digitized with very high accuracy. Okay, that's the basic idea of how ReCaptcha works. Now, it turns out this has been pretty successful. We are doing about 150 million words a day being digitized per day using this. which is the equivalent of about 2.5 million books a year, all being essentially typed one word at a time by just people typing CAPTCHAs on the internet. Now, since we're doing so many words, of course, funny things can happen. And this is especially true because we're now giving people 2 randomly chosen English words paired right next to each other. So funny things can happen. For example, we showed this word. It's just the word Christians. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you put it along with another randomly chosen word, funny things can happen. So for example, we showed this. OK. So this is pretty bad, but it's even worse because it turns out there's literally millions of websites using ReCaptcha. It turns out that the particular website where we show this actually happened to be called the Embassy of the Kingdom of God. Oops. Here's another really bad one, johnedwards.com. And here's one that I literally just got like 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is a pretty funny screenshot. So this is one from Mitt Romney's website. So we keep on insulting people left and right. And of course, there's not much we can do about it because for one of the words, we don't actually know what it is. So there's not much we can do in terms of filtering for this. So we just keep on insulting people left and right, which is pretty funny. OK, but it's not just insults. It's also just interesting stuff. And actually, this has given rise to a huge internet phenomenon that hopefully some of you have seen, which is a thing called CAPTCHA art. In case you haven't seen it, here's how it works. Okay, literally hundreds of thousands of people have participated in this. Here's how it works. Imagine you're surfing the internet, and suddenly you see a CAPTCHA that you think is interesting, like this one. Okay? Then what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to first take a screenshot of this CAPTCHA. Then you're supposed to, well, fill it out because you help us digitize books. And then afterwards, you're supposed to draw something that is related to this. Okay, so for example, this is an example of CAPTCHA art. Okay, there are literally hundreds of thousands of these. Some of them are cute, like this one. Some of them are funnier, like this one. And some other ones, like this one, paleontological schwizzle, they contain Snoop Dogg. Okay. Now, of course, this is the internet. It doesn't stop there. Okay, we're going one more. Some CAPTCHAs, like this one, okay, in case you haven't seen it, some CAPTCHAs like this one actually create entire religions around them. Let me explain. OK, so this is a Inglip summoned was a CAPTCHA that appeared. And then I guess somebody created a religion called the Church of Inglip, where Inglip is the Lord. That's their Lord. The followers of Inglip got their name from, supposedly, according to the Gospel of Inglip, supposedly it was the CAPTCHA that came right after this one for that same person. It was this CAPTCHA. The followers are called Gropagas. So that's Lord, the followers. And the whole idea of the religion is that Lord Inglip communicates with his followers through CAPTCHAs. Okay, it gives them instructions through CAPTCHAs. Okay, now, when we figured this out, we thought, that's really funny. And then we started messing with them. So we started presenting different CAPTCHAs to just mess with them, like this one. Now, the crazy thing about this is, for example, just on Reddit, there's supposedly about 10,000 followers of this religion. So there's tens of thousands of people who follow this religion. And I feel good about that because that is a larger number than the number of people who follow Harold Camping. If you don't know who Harold Camping is, that is the guy who last year predicted that the world would end. Remember that guy? Who predicted that the world would end last year. He had less than 10,000 followers, so I feel good about this. And of course, here's a bit of CAPTCHA art for that guy. OK, now, this is my favorite number of the ReCaptcha project. This is the total number of distinct people that have ever, so 950 million people. That's the total number of distinct people that have ever helped us digitize at least one word out of a book through ReCaptcha. So over 10% of the world's population has helped us digitize at least one word out of a book through ReCaptcha. And it is numbers like these that motivate my work. And in particular, the question that motivates my work is the following. If you look at humanity's large-scale achievements, these really big things that humanity has done historically, the big mega projects, or like the pyramids of Egypt, or the Panama Canal, or putting a man on the moon, there's a curious fact about them, and it is that all of them were done with about the same number of people. All of them were done with about 100,000 people. And the reason for that is because before the internet, coordinating more than 100,000 people was impossible. It's just not possible. But see, now with the internet, I just showed you a project where we've gotten 950 million people to work together to digitize human knowledge. So the question that motivates my work is, if we can put a man on the moon with 100,000 people, what can we do with 100 million? Okay, that's the question that motivates my work. And based on that question, I've worked on a bunch of different projects. Some of them have been successful. Some of them have failed completely. But let me tell you about the project that I started working on maybe 2.5 years ago. And it's the project that I'm most excited about. It's a project called Duolingo. And it started with the following question. Okay, so the question with Duolingo, when we started with Duolingo, we started with this question. How do we get 100 million people translating the web into every major language for free? Okay, let me say some things about this. First of all, translating the web. So right now, the web is written in multiple, it's kind of partitioned in different languages. More than 50% of it is written in English. And if you don't know English, you can't understand it. But there's also parts in Spanish, parts in Chinese, et cetera. And if you don't know those languages, you can't understand it. So I would like to translate all of the web into every major language. That's what I want to do. Now, when we started working on this, we thought, well, why can't we use computers to do this? So for example, there's machine translation that has gotten better over time. I'm sure most of you have seen Google Translate, for example. It's gotten better over time. Why can't we just do that? The problem is that it's not very accurate. It makes a lot of mistakes. And for example, you would never see like a book being translated by Google Translate and being sold, right? That just doesn't work. And it's not going to for the next 20 to 30 years. Okay? Just to show you kind of how bad it can get, let me just show you. This is a post that we found in a forum about Java. So it's a forum of questions about the programming language Java. And it was a post that was translated from Japanese into English using the best machine translation system. And I'm just going to show it to you so you can just read it. So at first, he just starts by apologizing for the fact that this is a computer translation. By the way, remember, this is supposed to be a question about the Java programming language. Okay? So here's the preamble to the question. Okay, here's the first part of the question. Here's my favorite part of the question. And here's my favorite part of the whole post. OK, so if we really want to translate the web accurately, we need people. But of course, if we want to translate the whole web, we can't do it with 50 people or 100 people. It's going to require literally millions of people to do it. Okay, and if we're going to do it with millions of people, I also can't pay them because, well, I can't really afford to pay 100 million people to do something. So the question is, how are we going to get 100 million people translating the web into every major language for free? That's what we started Duolingo with. Now, when we started, we pretty quickly got stuck. We got stuck with two pretty major obstacles. Okay? The first one is the lack of bilinguals. See, the fraction of the world's population that is bilingual enough to help us translate is actually quite small. And if I need to find 100 million of them, that's really hard. So that was one problem. The second problem was a lack of motivation. How am I going to motivate people to translate for free? That's something that you normally have to pay experts to do quite a bit of money. So how am I going to motivate them to do it for free? So we were stuck on this for a while until we actually realized there's a way to solve both of these problems with the same solution. There's a way to kill two birds with one stone here. And it is by transforming language translation into something that millions of people want to do, and that also helps with the problem of lack of bilinguals. And that is language education. Okay, so it turns out that today, there are about 1.2 billion people around the world learning a foreign language. People really, really want to learn a foreign language. And it's not just because they're being forced to do so in school. For example, in the United States alone, there are over 5 million people who have paid over $500 for software to learn a foreign language. Okay, people really, really want to learn a foreign language. So the idea with Duolingo is the following. Point one, we need a huge amount of language translation. Okay? Point two, there are about 1 billion people learning a new language. And sometimes when you're learning a new language, some of the exercises that you do are translation exercises, right? So the question with Duolingo is, why can't we get these people to do the translation for us? Okay? That's the question with Duolingo. And that is what we've been working on. It's a website called Duolingo, which we actually launched on June 19th, so about 4 months ago, where the idea with Duolingo is it's a free language learning website. You go there to learn a language, and it's 100% free. But the trick is that while you're learning a language, you're also helping us to translate the web. Okay, so some of the exercises that you get are translation exercises from real-world websites. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Now let me just play you this about 2-minute video that explains the idea a little better than I can. And so you just go ahead.
It's a big world out there. Billions of us trying to live, love, prosper, and make sense of our brief time on this planet. Since the dawn of humanity, we've been passing information from one person to another through a common language. Unfortunately, you can't communicate with others without knowing or learning their language first. A similar issue is manifested on the web, where text can be penned in dozens of languages, each of which demands a reader's fluency. We've developed an elegant solution to both problems, a way for you to learn a language for free, while at the same time helping to translate text from the web, enabling a wealth of language-shackled information to be liberated for all of humanity. It's called Duolingo. Here's how it works. Let's say you're a native English speaker who wants to learn Spanish. We start by giving you a sentence from a Spanish website and asking you to translate it. Wait, back up. How can you translate a language you don't know? First, Duolingo only gives you sentences that fit your language level. Beginners get the really simple sentences from the web, and advanced users get the more complex ones. This way, everybody becomes a valuable translator. And second, if you're really lost, you can always see possible translations for words you don't know. Afterwards, Duolingo helps you understand and memorize the words you hovered over through educational examples. You can also vote on the quality of other students' translations, which helps you learn by seeing how others translated the same sentence. And because you create valuable translations while you learn, we return the favor by offering Duolingo completely free of charge. No ads, no hidden fees, no subscriptions, just free. To put the potential benefit of Duolingo into perspective, think about this. If 1 million people would use Duolingo to learn, the entirety of English Wikipedia could be translated to Spanish in just 80 hours. Duolingo. Learn a language while translating the web.
Okay, so that's the idea of Duolingo. Now, when we started working on this, I actually didn't really know if it was going to work. In fact, I kind of thought it wasn't going to work. It was 2.5 years ago or so. But as time has passed, I've become more and more convinced that it really does work. And it turns out it really does work. So I'm quite happy about that. First of all, by work I mean, first of all, the translations are actually quite accurate. And second, people really are learning a language quite well with Duolingo. So that's a good thing. In fact, it's so good at teaching a language that on the day we launched, actually, PC Magazine made us their editor's choice for language learning. Gave us the same rating as Rosetta Stone, but of course, Duolingo is 100% free. Now, the most amazing thing for me about this is that PC Magazine is still around. And of course, people really like it. So for example, this person said, in the past 2 days, I've learned more from Duolingo than Rosetta Stone in over a month of use. Okay, so some people like it. Here's this other person, who was my mother. And of course, some of the things that people say are pretty creepy. So for example, let me just have you read this one. Okay. It's creepy. So people really like it. And one of the reasons people like it so much is because some of the learning that you're doing is with real-world content. So as opposed to just learning with sentences like, the girl runs fast, you're also learning with real-world content. So imagine learning English, in this case, by helping to read the New York Times, or reading articles of the New York Times while you're also translating them, or learning Spanish by reading the leading Spanish newspaper. So it's a pretty rewarding experience to be able to do this. Now, okay, so people do learn and they like it. The translations are extremely accurate. So if you look at, this is the comparison of two translations. On the top, this is a translation from German into English, by the way. I'm not showing the original German. On top is the Duolingo translation. At the bottom is a professional translation from somebody that we paid 20 cents a word to translate. And if you can tell, they're both of really good quality. In fact, we've done a study. The translations that we do are as accurate as those from professional translators, except, well, there's two things. First of all, they are as accurate as those from professional translators except for two types of things. One is legal stuff. It's not as accurate as professional translators. And the reason for that is because people don't understand legal stuff even in their own native language. So, and the other one that is not very good is poetry. Can't do poetry very well. Yeah, it's like, fortunately, the market for poetry translation is not very big. And what ends up happening with poetry is we do translate kind of the meaning, but not the form. That's usually what happens. So it gets translated into something that is not a poem. OK, so they're as accurate as professional translators. Now, of course, we play a trick here to get to this accuracy. And the trick is that each sentence gets translated by multiple people. And then they themselves choose to pick, vote on which one the best one is. But that one best one is as good as one from a single professional translator. OK, so it's good. By the way, if you have any questions, you can just ask me. Maybe I'm just rushing through. Yes, go ahead.
How do you deal with different alphabets?
That is a good question to which I do not know the answer, because so far we are only doing European languages. We are about to do Chinese. I mean, I would say we're going to release Chinese around March of next year, is roughly when I would say. By the way, that's a sliding deadline. I used to say December of this year, but we're about 3 months behind. Yes?
How is Duolingo making money?
That's a good question. We're not. But we have a plan to make money. We know exactly how to make money. It's basically we're going to charge for certain translations. So here's the thing. OK, we started by saying we're going to translate the whole web. That's great. Turns out there's a big problem with that. I cannot translate copyrighted content, because I would be breaking your copyright. So what we're doing now is we're only translating stuff that is in Creative Commons or somehow outside of copyright, because then we're not. But for copyrighted stuff, you have to upload it. You, the owner of the copyright, has to upload it to us. At that point, what we're going to do is, your stuff is copyrighted. OK, we'll charge you a little bit to translate it, is what's going to happen. And we're already running pilots with a few big news outlets to translate their stuff, but we're not charging them yet. So we're not making money, but we will. OK, any other questions about that? No other questions? OK. So let me show you. This is something that I've been told by my investors that I probably shouldn't show, but I show it anyways because I like it. So here's what happens. This is a retention curve. If you've never seen one, I will explain what it is. And I will also explain to you why this is good. OK, so this is a graph that shows users of Duolingo how many return on a weekly basis. OK, so 100% sign up. And oh, by the way, and this is also what's called a cohort. So this is the people that signed up on the first week of March. OK, the first number there, the first point, is the number of people that came back in the 1 week period 1 week after they signed up. So between days 7 and 14 after signing up, about 26% of them came back. Okay? The second point is the 1 week period 2 weeks after, so about days 14 to 21, something like 18% came back. And then it stabilizes at around 15%. So in this case, of the people who signed up in the first week of March, about 15% of them become active weekly, and it kind of lasts forever. Okay? Yes?
I'm wondering how many people.
Oh, in this case, I don't know the exact number. It was several thousands. I don't know how many. I don't know the exact number in this case. Yes. OK, so this is what happens. Now, just to give you an incentive, when I show this usually to academic audiences, they think, wow, it's so low. 15% is the one that end up becoming weekly actives. But actually, this is a very high number. Twitter's number is about 20% of the people who sign up become weekly actives. OK, now, this is the people who signed up the first week of March. And then what we're doing with the website is we're doing a lot of tweaks to try to make people come back more and more often. So here's the number of people. This is the number of people that sign up in the first week of April. So that's the first week of the next cohort. So you see it goes up. And here's the first week of May. It goes up, and it stabilizes. Actually, the May cohort stabilizes at around 20%. And right now, we're stabilizing at around 23, 24% of the people who sign up end up becoming weekly active. So that's actually quite a good number. And now, the way we've made improvements for this, the way you improve this curve, what you want for this curve is to go up and up and up and up. The way we've made improvements is by just making improvements to the website. Let me show you some of the ones that have made the largest change. Okay, for example, here's one. So actually, Duolingo, when you're learning in Duolingo, we have the website has a model of what you know. And in fact, education in Duolingo is completely personalized. So the exercises that we give you are different than the exercises that we give the next person. They're completely and entirely personalized. And the way we choose them is based on what we think you know. Okay, so we have a model of how well you know each word and how well you know each concept. So we know how well, and that's by watching you use the website. So if you make mistakes on a given word, we say you don't know it. And if you don't make mistakes of a given concept, we say you don't know that concept, et cetera. So we watch you use the website, and we have a concept, a model of how well you know it. One of the biggest things that made the retention go up higher is we just started exposing that model to the users. So we just started showing them, here's what we think you know. And just that made people come back more often. Okay, so that's one of the things. Here's another one. Whenever you make a mistake, or whenever it used to be the case that whenever you made a mistake, for certain things we can tell you. There are certain. So in Duolingo, there are two types of exercises: the ones for which we know the answer, and the ones that are just complete translations that we don't know the answer. For the ones for which we know the answer, we can tell you exactly whether you're right or wrong. And we used to just tell you right or wrong. Then at some point, we started telling you with more information about why you're wrong. So we started telling you, oh, you have a typo in your answer, or in this one, for example, we would say pretty specific stuff for some of the things. For in this case, it was in German. We said in the accusative case in German, you use einen for masculine nouns like Apfel. So we started giving you really precise feedback about what you got wrong. That also made people come back more often. Any questions, by the way, about anything? Yes? It's sentences. It's at the sentence level. It turns out, OK, so yes, it turns out it varies per language how to do that. But the complexity of a sentence is as follows. It's actually the opposite of what you would think. We used to, well, when we hadn't implemented this, we thought, OK, a hard sentence is one with hard words. That's kind of what we thought. And hard words are long words. So for example, the word zooplankton is a hard word. That should be a hard word. A sentence with the word zooplankton is a hard sentence. That's what we thought. Turns out that actually is a very easy word, because zooplankton translates to zooplankton. It is a very easy word. The hard words are actually usually the very short functional words are usually the hard words. Long words are usually pretty easy. So what we have basically, it's a formula that we've trained for each language. And some of the things that we look into for sentence length obviously matters. The longer the sentence, the harder. Then there are other things. For example, in Spanish, it turns out that the fraction of words that are pronouns matters. So the higher fraction of pronouns, the harder the sentence is. But that is true in Spanish, not as true in English. So basically, it varies per language, and we have a formula for each one that we've trained over some time. Any other questions about anything? OK, hard sentences? No. OK. Here's another one that was interesting. This is one of the lessons that I've learned of not always listening to what the users want. One of the most, I would say, second or third most common piece of feedback that we get in Duolingo is the following. Somebody says, hey, by the way, some of the exercises in Duolingo are spoken. So as in, you get to listen to some stuff, and you have to also speak to the website. One of the most common feedbacks is, can you allow me to turn this off so that, because I like to use Duolingo at work. And I can't have headphones, and I can't have the machine making noise. So can you allow me to turn this off? That was the feedback. And what we did is we went and implemented that. The way we did it is in the corner of the screen, we put a little thing that you can turn off your speaker or turn off your microphone. And we did that, and we thought that was going to massively increase retention because all these people were going to use Duolingo at work, and it was going to be awesome. This is what we thought. Turns out that when we pushed this feature, it actually decreased retention as opposed to increased it. And the reason for that was because when we allowed you to turn this off, some people turned it off. And when you turn it off, actually Duolingo becomes a lot crappier because you don't get to hear a bunch of stuff. So then people come back less. So that's what happens. So now you cannot turn off the audio. Well, you can, but it's really hidden as opposed to being in front of you. OK, so we did that. OK, I like this graph. This is usage by country of Duolingo right now. It's about 28% the US. This is rare. Usually it's, especially for a site that is so young and was launched in the US, The numbers that you're usually looking at is like 75% or so. Here, it's only about a quarter US. And then we have all these other countries, Mexico, Spain, et cetera. The reason I like to show this is because it's a funny thing. For us, for example, users from outside the US have much higher retention, so they come back much more often. They use the website for much longer, and they're much better students. But it's not because they're smarter. Why do you guys think it is? Yes?
Because they want to learn English.
Because they actually want to, well, first of all, yes, they want to learn English is what they want to learn. And second, they actually want to learn. It's not like a hobby. See, learning a language in English-speaking countries is usually a hobby. It's like, wouldn't it be nice if I learned some French? That'd be nice. But in other countries, non-English-speaking countries, learning a language, first of all, is learning English. And secondly, it's about getting ahead in life as opposed to a hobby. So they're way more motivated. So for us, actually, users from outside of the US are significantly more interesting because they stick around for longer and actually have a higher motivation by themselves. And this actually is one of the reasons why I'm particularly most excited about Duolingo, because I feel it's a much better business model for language education than the current business model for language education. The current business model for language education, at least, well, yeah, the current business model for language education is that the student pays. And in particular, the most common one in the US is the student pays Rosetta Stone, like $1,000. That's the current business model for language education. The problem with that model is that it completely discriminates against the people who do not have $1,000. And that, by the way, is the vast majority of people who want to learn another language. These are people, usually, in other countries who do not have $1,000. So this is a huge problem. They do not have access to the best methods for education. See, in Duolingo is 100% free for the student. And the reason it's free is because, in some sense, they're paying, but they're paying with their time. That's the time they're doing for translation. But this is time that anyways had to be spent learning another language. Okay, so it's something magical is coming there, and I like this. Okay, so that's Duolingo. And if you want to learn another language, duolingo.com. And that's basically all I had to say. Thank you. If there are other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes?
So when some websites, for example, 4chan,
Yes.
launch added ReCaptcha to their servers, there was a large
Project. Yes.
project is a good way to describe it.
Yes.
That was kind of very against ReCaptcha.
Yep.
To sabotage it by using various ethnic slurs and
Yes.
derogatory phrases.
Yes.
What was how did ReCaptcha handle this sudden influx of sabotage and ethnic slurs where it was supposed to be appropriate words like and or but?
Yeah, OK. So for those of you who don't know it, first of all, if you don't know what 4chan is, you're better off. But if you really want to know, basically it's a website. OK, it's a website. It has a community. But it's a community of, I would say, smarter than average people. But they like to wreak havoc on things. They like to do bad things on the internet. Some of the things they do are good. Some of the things they do are bad. OK, so here's what happened. Actually, we've had many run-ins with 4chan. The first one was not when 4chan implemented ReCaptcha, but it was for the Time 100 poll. So Time has a poll every year. It's called Time 100, which is the kind of the 100 most influential people of last year or something like that over the last year. And it's online. You can vote on it. Typically, what has happened is the people who win are the people everybody has heard about, right? It's like Barack Obama or like Justin Bieber. Those are the people who win, typically. Okay. This one year, 4chan decided they were going to do something about that. So they started writing programs to vote on the poll millions of times for different people. And in particular, they started voting for the founder of 4chan, a guy whose username is Moot, is M-O-O-T. So they started voting for Moot. Nobody had ever heard of Moot before, and he was winning. Okay, he was beating Barack Obama by like a huge margin. He had like 30 million votes, and the next one was Barack Obama with like 300,000 votes. It's a huge margin. So he was winning. But then they got a little bored because they were winning by so much that they decided they were going to not just have Moot win, but change other names in there so as the first letter of each name spelled marble cake. So they had such control over the poll that they started doing that. And once they did that, I guess Time realized that there was a problem. So they contacted us at ReCaptcha, and they're like, hey, we've heard you have a technology to stop people from these things. What should we do? And we're like, well, put ReCaptcha in there. And so they put ReCaptcha in there. And what happened is all the 4chan programs stopped working. So then what the 4chan kids did, by the way, these are kids, really. In general, these are mostly kids. What they did was they went and figured out how, well, they first tried to write a program that could figure out ReCaptchas. They failed. They couldn't do it. Then they went and read our paper in Science magazine to figure out how ReCaptcha exactly works. And they figured out this thing where, like, for one of the words, we know the answer. For one of them, don't know. And then eventually the ones, eventually one word, when one word becomes digitized, that becomes a control word. That becomes a word that we use to figure out whether people are human or not. So they're like, all right, let's poison the database is what we are going to do. So they started trying, what they did was they looked at the two words. They tried to figure out which one was the one we didn't know. And then they would enter correctly the one we knew. And then for the one we didn't know, they started actually with the word penis. So they just started entering the word penis. And they're like, all right, what's going to happen is all books are going to be digitized with penis, 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 penis. And we're going to, we're going to bypass the security mechanism. So that's what they thought. And they did it. And they were quite, they spent a lot of effort on this. We were getting something like 30 to 40,000 solutions a week. Just penis solutions per week. Fortunately, nothing happened because that actually happens to be a relatively small number compared to our whole solution. So we're getting on the order of 150 million solutions a day. So it was dwarfed by that. And also, we kind of realized, so now the code, this actually is part of Google Code now. There is a thing that says if penis, ignore. It's there. It's in the code. Yeah, censorship, but OK. OK, any other questions about the 4chan? Yes? Well, there's different for a different project. I mean, for ReCaptcha, it's about 53,000 people. That's Google. I'm just kidding. No, so for Duolingo, it's OK. So in reality, for ReCaptcha, it's a team of about 10 people working inside Google, which is a huge company. For Duolingo, it's about 20 now. It's growing, so about 20 people. Yeah.
So is there a department that actually then goes to check the translations?
No. We never do that. We never check anything. Yes, this is our philosophy. We do not check anything. If we were to check things, that would kind of defeat the purpose. So we don't want to do that. We don't check. We don't check. It turns out they're correct. But that's how we like it. It turns out they're correct, but we don't want to check. Yes, any other? Yes?
1 second.
One. There's a microphone, I guess.
You said you felt bad when you calculated all the time that people were entering CAPTCHAs in and what the productivity could be if those
Yes.
people were doing something else.
Yes.
What would be the productivity enhancement if everybody spoke the same language, whatever that would be?
Yeah. You're
I mean-
saying, why don't we just teach everybody English?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not
Okay.
saying it's got to be English.
Okay,
It could be
why don't we just teach everybody Esperanto? For example.
whatever.
Yeah. You're saying, yeah, I mean, this is a perfectly valid solution. I just don't think it'll ever work. I think there's just a lot of people who like to speak their own language. But I mean, a lot of people have proposed what you're saying.
Okay.
I think it's kind of been tried, but I don't think it's ever
Okay.
actually
And
worked
on
out.
a smaller scale, why doesn't the United States just go metric?
Just go to Mandarin?
Yeah, I mean, how much time is wasted every day doing, calculations between English and metric,
Yeah. I guess, okay. Yeah.
How many folks do you have signed up using Duolingo today?
Oh, for Duolingo, about 500,000. Yeah.
And how long will it take them to translate the web? You have to grow that number, right?
Yeah, we have to grow that number quite significantly. We need to go to tens of millions. The good thing is it's growing. It's growing. So that's good. But
Over
we'll
here,
see.
Luis.
Yes. OK.
So I noticed that most of your problems involve using large populations of people to solve a problem. Do you find that using your approach works at all with using smaller populations of people to solve problems?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, I typically work with very large numbers of people. Can you do all this with small numbers of people? Yeah, you can. Here's the thing. Developing each one of these systems, in some sense or another, costs millions of dollars. It's not just not because you have to spend millions of dollars, but just in terms of human time spending. I mean, it takes years to develop each one of these things. If a problem can be solved by a small number of people, you may as well just pay them to solve it, as opposed to develop one of these complex kind of, contraptions where you have to do all these things. So that's kind of how I felt. Yeah.
Any plans to filter this down to the K through 12 environment? Because
Yes.
we know that especially young children learn languages much more easily.
Yes.
So would it be effective trying to get the elementary school kids
Yep.
of the world doing something like Duolingo?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there are a lot of plans to bring this to K through 12. We want to, in as much as possible, do that. I think for many cases, it wouldn't necessarily be it wouldn't necessarily be replacing the teachers, but it would be a lot of times supplementing the teachers. And also, for another nice thing is, we've looked at this quite a bit. It turns out the majority of schools in the US have foreign language departments, but foreign language department means Spanish department in many cases. So because they just don't have the resources to offer, less common languages. Even German, a lot of schools don't offer German. So we've also been thinking about well, if your school doesn't offer German, we can try to come up with something where an after-school program where you can do German through Duolingo. The good thing is that it's totally free, and it'll remain free forever. So yeah, we want to do that. Yes?
Have you seen how Khan Academy is kind of doing the same thing with their content, bringing what the concept of flipped classroom?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, so your question, I don't know what your question is. We have.
Wondering if you've thought about it, if you went it that way, and if you've had any experience doing that?
Yes. Now, I will tell you one thing about language learning. Language learning is a little different than, so Khan Academy is really good, for example, at math. Math typically is not about memorization. It's about understanding a concept. So in that respect, a video is pretty good. For something like Duolingo, for language learning, there's not that much concepts to understand about another language. It's mostly a memorization task, and you just got to stick through it for literally hundreds of hours, just doing and doing exercises. So that's why we haven't done things like these videos or something, because for learning a language is very different from math. It's really the way to do it is just do it and do it and do it and do it and do it, and eventually seeps in. I could explain the concepts of German to you in probably a few hours, and you would probably understand them, but you wouldn't know German.
We have enough time for one more question, if there's.
People coming in for multiple languages, and also can you determine if they come in at a different strength for different languages? And also, what if you want to learn, let's say you want to learn French as opposed to Quebecois French, or Latin American Spanish as opposed to Spain Spanish?
Okay, so I see you snuck in a number of different questions. Okay, good. Okay, so do we have people learning more than one language? Yes. Around 10% of the people in Duolingo are learning more than one language. Can we test how good they are when they start? Yes, we can, and we do. So we figure out pretty early on how good you are at a given language. Turns out it's not that hard. After we watch you use the website for about 5 minutes, we get a pretty good idea of what your level is. And then your last question was, what do we do with variations of languages? Yeah, it depends on how big the variation is. For example, just to give you an example that you probably will understand, do we make a difference between American English and British English? No, we don't. Just it's English, and fine, there's a few differences in spelling. We don't care about that. The same with Spanish. We actually don't make a distinction, but we're probably going to make a distinction with Portuguese because that actually is different enough. So I think the answer to that is if they're different enough, then we will make a distinction. But for example, for Spanish, I'm a native Spanish speaker. You can teach, even though it is different, Latin American Spanish from Spain Spanish. Turns out if you're in Europe, you want to learn Spain Spanish. But we don't care. We just teach you Spanish. And yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for a very engaging presentation. And while I might have summarized what you were going to say, I think you did a much better job. So, and I want to give you a small token of
thank you.
appreciation for
Thank you.
coming here today. And
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Opposed? And thank you all for coming, and please join us in the atrium for some refreshments.